أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Respected viewers, Honorable guest speaker Lameze Abrams, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I trust you all are doing well. Thank you and for joining us today, and welcome to the webinar topic grief, mourning and being supportive by our facilitator, clinical psychologist Lameze Abrams. Welcome to you all. For those joining us for the first time, a very brief introduction to who Muslims Connected is. So we are an online education platform. We provide courses, some free and some paid, in various subjects, languages such as Arabic, Spanish, Turkish, and other languages. And also we have courses in tuition for school subjects that is running. And we also have some other courses in psychology, in the Islamic subjects. And we also have very important webinars covering topics which are important in the community. Last week, or Tuesday this week, we had Dr. Rafiq giving a presentation on anxiety. And today we have clinical psychologist Lameze Abrams speaking on grief, mourning, and being supportive. A brief background on Lameze. Lameze Abrams is a clinical psychologist with more than 20 years experience. She has filled the roles of principal psychologist at the largest psychiatric hospital in the Western Cape, and chair of the Division of Psychotherapy at the University of Cape Town, chair of the South African chapter of the International Consortium of Universities for Drug Demand Reduction, and also deputy chair of the Division of Psychologists in Public Service at the Psychological Association of South Africa. Lameze has a passion for advancing community psychology and is pursuing a PhD at the University of Cape Town, Department of Psychiatry and Mental Health. Allow me to introduce to you Lameze Abrams. Lameze Abrams, how are you?
Hi, shukran for that introduction. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm really grateful for being here, and shukran for inviting me. I'm in load shedding at the moment, so you'll just see kind of darkness around me. But hopefully my LED lights will hold up.
Yes, no problem. Can I just add the comment about the or the questions and answers? The viewers, you can send your questions in the Q&A section. Okay, so try to send all your questions in the Q&A sections. Maybe comments that you can send in the chat, and Lameze will get your questions in due time. Okay, you can go ahead, Lameze.
Okay, shukran. So I think I just need to load my, I was going to share presentation. Can you allow me to screen share?
Sure, let me just do that. Okay, could you just try that now?
Yeah, it seems to be working. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
I think it's loading. There we go. Beautiful.
Okay. So shukran for that lovely introduction. So yeah, today I'm going to be reflecting on the process of grief and mourning. And, I know that this is a potentially quite painful and difficult topic for most of us. And, just thinking about when I was preparing this presentation, I actually felt really grateful for this opportunity. And I want to say shukran to you for this, because it helped me to, or allowed me to also reflect on where I'm at in my own process of grief, for those that I've cared for and that I've lost. And just helped me to know that we've also all had many, many multiple losses over the last few years, particularly, I think, and it's been particularly difficult to mourn those that have passed. And I think it just made us so much more aware of how important those rituals and the mourning process that we follow is in our grieving of those that have passed. Before I start with the presentation, I'd like everyone to maybe just take a moment, just take a breath, and maybe just reflect on a time when you've lost a loved one. Just what were the feelings that you remember having at the time? You don't need to share this. You're welcome to do so if you feel comfortable to, but just to reflect on what does grief feel like for you? Maybe just what are the feelings that come up for you? Just taking a moment to reflect on that. So as we all know, it's really not possible to go through life without experiencing loss. Grief is generally the response to that loss that we experience, and therefore it's a really common human experience, is what most of us go through or will experience in our lifetime. And when we go through life, we also, will experience a variety of losses for which we grieve. It might be the loss of a loved one, but it might also be, if we lose a function in terms of our health or occupationally, or in many, many ways. When we think about grief and bereavement, it's really the kind of constellation of all of these thoughts and feelings we have when we experience a loss. We can think of it maybe as the container. It holds all of our feelings, our thoughts, our images of this experience. And so grief, in a way, is the internal meaning that we give to our experience of loss. Grieving necessarily requires us to first recognize that loss and death is part of life and is part of, the cycle of changes that happen in life. As we know, bereavement and grief can really encompass a range of feelings, from sadness to anger, guilt, despair. And the process of adapting to particularly significant loss can be very different from one person to the next. So each person, I think, grieves in their own way. So even though it might be a common human experience, we might, share some feelings in terms of how we are experiencing that loss. Essentially, it's very personal. It depends on a range of things in terms of your background, your beliefs, and the relationship to what was lost. A lot of the time we see grief as kind of interfering with life, but essentially it's quite intrinsic to life. And in that way, we sometimes need to think about how we, how do we mentor our children with regards to death and dying and grieving and mourning, because I think if we, for example, if you saw your parents and family kind of being strong and maybe not crying or holding in their tears when they experience a significant loss, or maybe they shut down their feelings, then you might grow up thinking that this is what you do when you're feeling sad. This is what you do when you experience a loss. So a lot of the time, children are looking at us as the adults to get an understanding of, okay, you know, this significant loss has happened. How do I process this? How do I express these feelings that can be quite confusing for a young child? And so they really look to the adults to see how we are dealing with it, you know, and if we are open and transparent and share our feelings and share what the process is, or share what we, you know, what we are feeling, and they see us mourn, you know, these losses, it then allows them to also feel comfortable and safe to be open about what they're feeling. So grief work is really dealing with the loss. And this means that we, you know, it will need physical, emotional, and psychological energy to do that. So just a couple of things that when we are thinking about talking to children about, you know, grieving and loss, that just to bear in mind that up to the age of 3, children are really worried or concerned about separation. They understand that, but death is not yet something that's very permanent for a 3-year-old. So for them, it can still feel quite temporary, and they might ask about, oh, but when is so-and-so coming back? Even though you might have shared with them that this person has passed on. For them, it's not yet a, you know, they don't yet have a full understanding of that. From the age of 5, children might regard death as meaning someone has been taken away, but it's only really from about 9 or 10 that they kind of understand that death is a permanent biological process that happens, and the person is, you know, no longer with us in that sense. Mourning is really a vital part of healing through grief. Mourning generally is understood as the outward expression of grief, and generally there's many ways that we mourn in order to heal our grief. What is important is that we do so openly and honestly, expressing what our thoughts are, our feelings are from the inside out. So not feeling that we have to pretend or repress, you know, any of our feelings. And it's somewhere, I read this and I thought this was so powerful. It's somewhere in the collision between the heart, which searches for permanency and connection, and then the brain, which acknowledges separation and loss, that there is where we can authentically mourn. So what this means, it's about kind of being consciously aware of what the feelings are that we are feeling, and kind of allowing that feelings to be there. It's painful, you know, acknowledging all of our feelings. It's painful to kind of be in touch with it and to connect with it. We will feel sad. It will literally feel like our heart is breaking. We might have feelings such as helplessness and despair and fear and sadness and anxiety and kind of the whole range of feelings. And some of them can be quite confusing, but at the same time, that's the point at which we need to enter into. You know, we need to be able to move towards those feelings rather than away from it. Because when we move away from it, we are then avoiding, you know, acknowledging that those feelings are there. And when we avoid those feelings, it means that it will come up again at some later time, you know, in what we call kind of delayed grief, and might be even more difficult to process than, you know, at that time, because it would have been delayed. But also when we avoid our feelings, then we might tend to act them out sort of with others. Like if we have children, we might, you know, come home and be quite angry and tense and so on with our children or with others in our environment. So, you know, so it's really important that we don't suppress or deny these feelings, but that we truly kind of allow ourselves to experience it. In psychology, we sometimes talk about befriending our feelings. So befriending these emotions, even if they are hard, even if they are tough emotions to befriend, it's really important that we we create the possibility for allowing that experience to be there. It's in that process that we can create meaning and purpose for our life without the deceased person, there any longer. We also sometimes, tend to set timelines, and I hear this sometimes from patients. It's been a year and I'm still really struggling with, the loss of my husband or my partner or my mom. And, I always think it's really important to know that there isn't any timeline to this process of mourning, and that it's going to, it might take months, it might take years, and maybe, it's kind of a lifetime, because when I think about, when we lose a loved one, I like to think about it in the way that, we tend to grieve and we tend to mourn those that we love. When we hear about somebody who's passed on, don't really know them, we can be sad for that person and the family. We're like, oh, shame, that's sad, but we don't feel it as much. But when it's somebody that we love and we're close to and we're connected to, that's when that grief is painful and it's sore. And if we think about it, that's because that's the love that's there. And I think that love never dies. So, even though the person is no longer there, that feeling of, I really love this person. So that feeling of grief and missing them and feeling sad that they're no longer there might be there for a very long time. But I think that, certainly in Islam, we have mourning rituals that really support this grieving process. We can read from the Quran, we can make du'as, we can, have private moments of kind of reflection. But I think what's really stood out to me is how we kind of express grief in a kind of reserved and dignified manner. And I think that's about really respecting ourselves and the families or whoever's going through the bereavement process. It kind of creates and even for the person that's passed, that kind of sense of being able to create some sense of dignity around their passing. So I think that these are actually really important rituals that we have. Often it's said that in certainly in Islam, for the mourning period, it's 3 days for family and friends, as we know. For women whose husbands have died, it's 4 months and 10 days. But generally what happens, and we know in Cape Town, in South Africa, that, we would have, 3 days, we would have people coming together, the community supporting the family through du'as and through having some kind of remembrance of the person that's deceased. But all of these processes that we have, coming together after 3 days, 7 days, after a year, or, those kinds of moments are really important in showing up for the family, showing up for those that are left behind, because they are the ones that, are missing that person every day. And a lot of people that I work with, will often reflect and say that, the first, say 7 days, there's a lot of activities, a lot of people there. That support is really, really important. The auntie that just comes into the house and just makes tea or makes a pot of food, or people bringing you food and making sure those everyday chores are taken care of. That is support, that's offering support to the family in a very practical way. And so sometimes it's really kind of thinking, when you're thinking about what can you do for the other person, sometimes just thinking, okay, what is it that I can offer? Some of us can offer, we have skills with making amazing meals, and so we can offer that. For others, maybe you're a really good listener and you can just sit with the family and just listen to them talking about what happened. That's really important. So it's thinking about in what ways can we provide support. And it doesn't have to be, sometimes, financially, that's providing some kind of financial support helps families, but it's also thinking broader than that, because, sometimes just as everyday, making sure that, the family has supper sorted, or the kids are taken care of, or, somebody takes the kids for a day out, so that the adults can have some time to themselves. Those kinds of things are really important. So when I saw this, I thought, wow, this is really, really kind of touched me. But, what is stronger than the human heart, which shatters over and over and still lives? So that sense of that yes, our hearts break, and we feel sad, and sometimes we feel, even despair, but something is still there. It's still alive. It's still beating, and just speaks to kind of the strength of the human heart. I'm just going to reflect a little bit on the psychological models of bereavement, in terms of how we, understand the bereavement process. And there's various models. And I think maybe just to, as I'm going through this, just to take away kind of, okay, what are the commonalities in what they're all saying? Perhaps just paying attention to that. So John Bowlby was kind of spoke about it, or theorized on attachment. And what he says is that attachment basically develops quite early in life. We all kind of can have a sense of that. We often, the first relationships that we have is with our caregivers. It's usually our parents. Sometimes it can be a granny or grandpa or whoever is in our life, but it's our primary caregiver. That's our first attachment that we ever have. And so those attachments are really important because they offer a sense of security, and survival, really, for us as humans. So when those affectional attachments are broken or lost in some ways, we can experience distress and emotional disturbance like anger and anxiety. And Bowlby describes kind of 4 phases of mourning that we, he says we need to move through in order to find some kind of resolution. So the first phase is shock and numbness. And this is generally the phase where it almost seems kind of unreal that this has happened, and it feels really difficult to accept. This phase can also result in some kind of physical distress. So some people really, they feel they can't eat, their bodies sore, they have some kind of somatic symptoms. And it's really important to kind of process and progress through this stage, because it's through we have to move past the kind of numbness and the shock, so that we can really kind of dig deeper into our full range of how we're feeling about this, because, we'll be feeling sad and angry or guilty about something, but to be able to move beyond the numbing and actually really get to what we're feeling. Because if we don't do that, what happens is that we'll just end up being emotionally shut down and then, not be able to find resolution to the grief. The next stage that he talks about is yearning and searching. And this is when, according to him, we become like aware of that, the void that's left from the person that is now gone, or where the future we imagine is maybe not going to be that future that we imagined. We might search for comfort from, try to fill the void of the person's absence. We might continue identifying with the person that has died and almost looking for constant reminders of them and ways to be close to them. So this is almost when somebody is unable to let go of that person. So maybe when people kind of hold on to, just an example, like if somebody, struggles to unpack the person's wardrobe, it's okay to hold on to a few items. I think that has meaning for you, when you're processing through grief. But I think if somebody's struggling to let go of anything of the person, that means that they're stuck in a particular phase, and this sort of, is what he's referring to. The next stage that we need to then negotiate is despair and disorganization. And he talks about that in this stage, we would have accepted that everything has changed and will not go back to the way it was. Here we find the hopelessness and despair that comes with this, the anger, the questioning. Life feels as if it won't improve, or without the person that has passed on. We may withdraw from others. And if we do not progress through this phase, then we will continue to kind of be consumed by this anger and depression. And it might even lead to us having developing a clinical depression, which will need other kinds of mental health intervention. So hopefully we can kind of create space for acknowledging all of these feelings and allow it to be there, and just process it and find ways to talk about it and share it with others, to a place where we can find some sense of reorganization and recovery. And in this phase, he talks about faith in life starting to be restored, being able to establish new goals and patterns of life, slowly starting to rebuild. That life can still be positive even after loss. So it's more kind of sense of integrating that person's loss. And he makes an important point of that in this phase of the grief. It doesn't mean that the grief goes away or that it's fully resolved, but it's really that the loss kind of recedes. So it doesn't feel like it's overwhelming every other aspect of the person's being and life. So the next theorist is Mourning, and he talks about the tasks of mourning. He also has 4 stages here, and you'll see there's a lot of similarities in terms of these processes, or how they theorize about the process of bereavement. And Mourning talks about having 4 tasks. The first one is really to accept the reality of the loss. So again, moving beyond the kind of shock of it, and to that this has happened. The second phase is really being able to experience the pain of the loss and then work through that pain and grief. Third stage is about adjusting to the new environment without the person there. And then the fourth is really about being able to emotionally relocate the deceased, and being able to imagine a kind of new reality without this person in it. But again, Mourning also talks about the fact that we can't just fit, grief doesn't fit neatly into kind of these boxes, or goes through these steps quite as neatly. That generally, when we are bereaved, we will tend to move back and forth from one task to another. So I think the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief is probably the one that's most well known. And she also talks about, the initial stages. You can see again similar: denial, the anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I think the value of, these cycles is also being able to understand what is it that people need, say, in the first stages of grief and mourning. They talk about information and communication and emotional support, so that, in the first stages, that would be the most important offering that we could provide to those people. But perhaps in the last few stages, when we see them moving towards acceptance, we can also help more with kind of guidance and moving them in a particular direction to go, okay, what does this look like now going forward in terms of your future? So being able to hold space in the first process or phases of grief, And, sometimes people need information to understand, well, what am I going through? What is this? I'm feeling all of these feelings. And so being able to just help people understand, oh no, this is normal. This is a normal part of grieving. It's normal to feel angry. It's normal to feel guilty. It's normal to have all of those feelings, and it's okay. I think then, we know also how we can help and support. So Silverman and Klaas talks about continuing bonds. And I think I really like this one because they do not see bereavement or grieving as ever fully resolved, or kind of culminating closure or recovery. Rather that what they do is that they propose, rather than letting go, the bereaved person negotiates and renegotiates the meaning of the loss over time. So even though death is permanent, grieving and mourning can somehow maintain the presence of the deceased, in terms of the family, in terms of how they are remembered, that they're not forgotten, that actually they were an important part of, our history or our family legacy. And so being able to remember that person and celebrate their life in a way is really, can be really helpful. And I like this this little picture, kind of sometimes thinking about, well, what would this person have done in this situation? Or, when you're talking around a family dinner and you're remembering a certain person, and you'll be like, oh, this person would have said so this and this, and it's like a funny moment that you have, and what incredible joy that can bring to the family, even though the deceased person is no longer with them. So I think this is the last one, of the theories. So Stuber and Schutt talks about the dual process. And basically, this is sort of more of a dynamic model, where they talk about the person kind of moving between what they call loss orientation and restoration orientated activities. So what they suggest is that the grieving person will focus on the kind of restoration plans or activities when focusing on the loss becomes too much. But that both can be a kind of source of a great source of distress. So it's finding the kind of balance between that. And that the coping task is not to return to a previous level of functioning, but to be able to negotiate a meaningful life without the deceased. So you'll see in all of these theories, it's generally, there's a sense of it there being in kind of quite an acute phase where there's shock and denial and, just coming to terms with what's happened, and then moving into the feelings and emotions of, what that brings up for the person, and hopefully with enough support and the person kind of, processing the grief, they can move towards some kind of way of orientating their new life without the deceased person there. So the grieving process really just needs to be interpreted as it's not sequential, so it's not like a linear process. And I like this diagram on the right here, because it's it's not a linear process. It kind of moves through. People move through the grief experience, and this can change over time. And somebody can kind of be, really okay for a long time, and then something might happen, maybe another loss, and that loss then brings up the previous losses that they've had, and then it feels quite, cumulative at that point. And all that means is that there's something else that needs to be healed. There's still more healing to happen, perhaps, and so it gives an opportunity for that. And then just to also note with this that even with the process of mourning, there's obviously many feelings. There can also be kind of physical experiences, thoughts that the person might have with the process of mourning. So this, all of these kind of helps the person to hopefully, move through the grieving process. One of the, one of the emotions that often comes up, I think, where individuals who are struggling with the grieving process, one of the emotions that are most powerful is anger, that I think really sometimes creates a challenge or difficulty with processing the grief. But it's also sometimes a really important stage of the healing process, but can also be really confusing for the persons that's grieving. Sometimes anger can be directed towards the person that has died or that has passed. Sometimes it's at, anger at, and I've heard this quite a lot during especially the COVID period, anger at the hospital, feeling like something happened there, something like they could have saved this person and they didn't. So a lot of anger that's there. Sometimes anger at Allah Ta'ala for why did this happen. And I think it's really important for, if that is coming up, for it to be acknowledged, because sometimes I see people who feel very ashamed. So they're feeling these feelings, the anger is there, it's really present for them, but they also feel really ashamed of it. I mean, who wants to say, well, yes, I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling anger at this person that's passed, even though, I mean, they couldn't help it, but I'm feeling this really intense emotion. And so it's finding kind of safe spaces for them to be able to express that, and for that feeling to be held and soothed, maybe, if that's what's needed. But most important, to just kind of be acknowledged and just kind of go, yeah, it's grieving is a very personal process. And so to kind of respect that is that person's process. And I think when that is allowed, when the person is allowed to express that, over time, when I work with people, I can see how, because they've been able to open up, their hearts and kind of share that feelings, even if it's feelings that they wouldn't feel comfortable sharing with anybody else. If they have a safe space to kind of open up and share that, over time, you kind of see how that feeling of anger kind of softens, and they able to look back and say, well, yeah, this is how I felt, 2 months ago. And sometimes patients will reflect with me and say, I was angry with Allah Ta'ala and I was doing these things, but they feel more authentically now connected, to Allah Ta'ala, to being able to, feel comforted in their faith. So I think that it's really important that, we allow for these feelings, and to never tell somebody, but it's not okay that you feel like that, you shouldn't be feeling this, or you shouldn't be feeling this, because we're not in that person's shoes. So we don't know what the experience is like for them. And I know that for me in my work, one of the most difficult kind of grieving to hold is that of parents who's lost a child. It's one of the most hardest and painful experiences to have ever, I think. And I work with many people who've, they've lost parents and they've lost sisters or brothers, and they lose a child, and they say, like, they never thought that, it could be as painful as that feels. And it's a different kind of experience. So it's really important that people are allowed to, to acknowledge what they're feeling. So as I've shared, grief is really a kind of multifaceted response to loss. And sometimes when you know, we spoke a lot about the kind of emotional response to loss, but sometimes people can also have very strong physical sensations associated with grief. This can be really overwhelming, it can be distressing, particularly if you experience kind of anxiety or kind of panic attack-like symptoms in the chest tightening. That can really feel for some people like they themselves are dying. They're feeling like they're going to die right now. That's what a panic attack feels like. This can really also take up quite a lot of energy, this kind of physical sensations that they have. And so, you know, that it's part of the grieving process, but it's helping people to kind of work through or just move past those experiences where they're feeling maybe their chest is tight, they're feeling anxious, to be able to just maybe take a deep breath, or a few deep breaths even, and just acknowledge that, okay, this is happening now, but this will pass. In psychology, is kind of what we refer to as riding the wave. So just literally riding the wave of whatever that experience is, and to breathe into it, because the breath is something that we always have with us. It's always really important. If we can find ways of being able to breathe into our fullness, you know, it can be a really powerful tool for helping us through those times where things feel really distressing. The other kind of, I suppose, tool that can be used is if the person can, in their minds, just imagine a place where they feel really safe, or they feel, okay, this is a tranquil place. It's the way of using kind of visualization to help them deal with that very distressing feeling. The other processes that can really help with dealing with, you know, some of the other responses to loss can be for the person to continue to tell their story. So just, you know, when you're sitting with somebody that's lost a loved one and they're talking about the loved one, and even if it's the same story we hear 5 times, it's kind of allowing that. It's allowing them to process, because the more they do that, the more in their minds they're reconciling this loss. They're reconciling, and they are trying to integrate the fact that this person is no longer there in their life and what that means for their future. So sometimes just being with somebody can be so powerful without having to say anything, without having to feel like you need to fix it or make it better, because we can't. And so I know that sometimes we feel quite helpless in that situation. We feel like, oh no, I need to do something. Then you can go make a cup of tea if you feel like you need to do something. Go make the cup of tea, you know, for that person. That's one way of supporting them. But it's usually a lot more helpful just to sit with them and to allow them to be. So the another important kind of way of processing grief, especially with a loved one, and it's something that I use in practice quite often, is for people to write a letter to their loved one and to read it out loud. You know, they can decide what they want to do with the letter afterwards. They might want to keep it, you know, in a drawer. Some people prefer to burn it, or, you know, that kind of thing, as a way of kind of processing that grief. And it's really up to the person what they would prefer to do. But the process of writing this letter to the loved one is also a way of, similar to that, kind of like being able to talk about them and so on. When you kind of, you know, when the person's processing all of these feelings, and you know, grief can kind of resemble all the symptoms of depression. You know, people don't sleep, they don't eat. They're crying all the time, they're sad, they're withdrawing. That's all kind of normal process when we think about grieving, the loss of a loved one. But it's when that lasts for too long, like if it's, for more than 6 weeks and it's going on to 8 weeks now, and the person is still not sleeping and not eating, and it's, or their functioning is deteriorating, then that is when it would be important for them to see someone, a mental health practitioner, a GP or psychologist, anyone, to really assess whether, this is still part of normal grieving, or whether they might need kind of other mental health supports to help them either to be able to process that grief, maybe in a safe environment with a psychologist, or with someone, with a counselor, that might be what they then need at that stage. So I think it was Freud that believed that sort of said that in grief, and this is sort of how one conceptually thinks about the difference between grief and depression, is that he said that in grief the world looks poor and empty, while in depression the person feels poor and empty. So this is kind of my last slide. So I just want to reflect on that, on how we think about loss of somebody, how we kind of what it gives us an opportunity to reflect on. And I think what it helps us to reflect on is that it also points to our own mortality, and can teach us maybe to live life more fully in the present moment. It teaches us about loss. We experience this loss. But perhaps it also teaches us then to have a clearer sense of what we value, where our values come from, and what is of greatest value to us, what gives us the greatest meaning in our lives. So in that moment when we experience that, the loss of a loved one, or the death of a loved one, it kind of is a moment for us to reevaluate our own lives, our own relationships with ourselves, with those that we care about, even spiritually, thinking about our connections, and what we're wanting to bring more of into our life. Perhaps thinking about opportunities for forgiveness, and for finding ways of just living in gratitude of what's most important for us. Because I think when we live in the everyday and we're busy, we do sometimes lose touch of that. And so those are almost anchoring moments for us to kind of go, okay, this is time for reflection and perhaps re-evaluating, what you want to do next. So as much as loss is, or kind of loss is a reminder of something that's no longer there, it's also kind of an opportunity for reflecting on, what we do have and what we do have to be grateful for. So I think that's it. I'm just ending off with a slide. I really like this, The Uses of Sorrow by Mary Oliver. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness, and it took me years to understand that this too was a gift. So thank you. Shukran.
Lameze, for that excellent presentation. I think just for myself, key words for me was just accepting loss, living in the present, renewal, and gratitude. That was for me. Thank you so much. I think we can move on to the Q&A questions. So would you like me to read it out for you, or would you just take over
I'm just looking at it now. So
okay.
Okay. Okay. So, sure. So agoraphobia. So it sounds like you obviously experienced quite a significant loss with the divorce that you know that you experienced. I'm really sorry about that. I think that you know, even if we are the ones that initiate the ending of a relationship or initiate a divorce, it's still a loss, and so it's still an ending. And then, you know, there's also grieving that would be important to process in that as well. You know, any kind of ending, any kind of loss, there's a process of grief that needs to be supported. I think I would really, so you asked about agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is really where I think you kind of become quite fearful and anxious about being in public spaces. It's usually associated with panic attacks, anxiety. It is an anxiety disorder. And I suppose I would need to know a little bit more about you to understand, you know, how that is linked to the ending of the relationship or the loss. But I can only imagine that maybe it's just part of, like I explained in the presentation, that process of grief where one can experience those physical sensations, anxiety, panic attacks. All of those can happen because you must remember that this person that you had been in a relationship with, you don't enter a marriage thinking, oh, I'm going to divorce at some stage. You have hope for that marriage. You envision it in a certain way, and so when it ends, it can be really, really difficult and really devastating. There's many breathing techniques out there. There's a very easy one that I will share with you now, and maybe you can also do it with me. It's kind of where you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold your breath, and then you breathe out for as long as you can. So I'll do it like this. I'll be like breathing in, 2, 3, 4, hold it, and then breathing out all the air, and then breathing in, hold, and then kind of breathing out like that. So what you're doing there is you're just kind of allowing yourself to take in as much oxygen as possible, and also slowing down your breath. That can help with anxiety. But what I would suggest you do, if you're having, you know, this level of distress where it's creating agoraphobia, I mean, that can really impact your functioning. I would really encourage you to seek mental health support for that. Okay. So the second question was, how important is expressing grief? I hope I've I hope I've like made that really, really clear that it's really important to find a way of expressing it. You know, so when we mourn, that's one way of being able to do it, of being able to express it outwardly. But you know, some people maybe don't feel comfortable, you know, sharing with others, or, you know, even their family don't feel comfortable sharing with their family how they're feeling. I would encourage you to think about keeping a journal, or, like I said, writing a letter to the loved one. You know, those are ways that you can also express grief that can be, one, you know, I can think of it as more kind of private. Oh, Sumaya, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know how we can maybe support this. Where's the Q&A? But yeah, definitely there's you know, there's ways that you could do that. There's lots of psychologists that we do online work and online sessions. It's, you know, like I said in my presentation, that's one of the experiences of grief that I know is the hardest to process and deal with. It's really, really difficult to kind of move past it, but people do. But it will always be there. but it's kind of finding a way to be able to integrate, your daughter and what, she brought to your life in the time that she was alive, perhaps, and being able to remember that as well. But I would really encourage you to just take really good care of yourself right now, your husband as well, to take care of yourselves and also to take care of each other in this. And if you can find a counseling where you can do that jointly, that would be, I think, would be my recommendation. But I'm so sorry, Sumaya. You'd like ways on what you can do or say to someone that has lost a loved one. Like I said, there's in the initial stages of when the loss has occurred, what's been really helpful, and I mean, I know even in my experience when my mom passed away about 10 years ago, just having that first week, my auntie's just there making food, somebody making tea when people came, so that we didn't have to do those things was so, like, when I think about it now, I'm so grateful for all of them, because I don't think that our family would have been able to cope really through that time without that support. So sometimes, just making supper and taking it to that person is a way of supporting them. And like I said, it's not even about what you say. It's just about listening and understanding that this is hard for them to go through, and allowing them to a space to share what they're feeling. Shaheen, it's a year for your husband yesterday. Oh, sorry about that. So I'm just reading your message. Wow, you had 31 years together. So I can imagine that this is really, really difficult, kind of thinking about a life without him, and what do you do now, I think from what you're sharing with me, I mean, I would say that it would be probably best for you to go and see someone, because what I would be concerned about is that this is no longer just kind of, bereavement and grief and normal grief. But if it's moving into depression, then you would need, other kinds of mental health supports for that, Shaheen. And, I think that, just kind of being able to reach out and get help for that, I think it's really important, because we don't have to, I think we sometimes feel like we have to kind of suffer through something, like, I have to just kind of suffer through this feeling or through the situation. But just knowing that there is help and support out there, I think it's kind of connecting with that and be able to access that support. Because it sounds like you might, I might be thinking that you might, just need to get assessed, to see that it's not moving into a depression. My dear, what reasons do bereaved people give for feeling angry towards the deceased? Oh, it's they feel sometimes that, if it's somebody that, so examples is the most, like a very obvious one is if somebody's died by suicide. There's a lot of feelings about that. It's quite traumatic for those that are left behind. And it's so important that they are able to kind of acknowledge those feelings, because they feel it anyway. But if they don't acknowledge it and they go like, I'm feeling angry, but I don't feel that I can share this with anyone, then that's when it can become complicated. That's when the bereavement, and doesn't get processed. But there's also many other reasons people feel that their loved one abandoned them. It's not a logical or rational thing that happens. It's not kind of, no, but they didn't abandon you, they died. Like, yes, the person knows that, but it's the feeling of abandonment that happens, and so that can leave people feeling angry.
Lameze, I'm
Sabah,
just conscious of the
yes.
time, to be fair
Okay,
to you as well.
like a
Yeah,
100
so
questions.
we won't get through all the questions. There are some
Okay.
great questions. We won't get through all of them. So maybe at your discretion, if maybe just finish off and maybe just give a concluding remarks.
Yes. Okay. Oh, okay. That's fine. It's like it's okay. We can end there. I just want to thank you all for this. Like I said at the beginning, when I started doing the presentation, just I felt really grateful because I realized that it's given me an opportunity to reflect on where I'm at in my own process of grief, with people that I've lost. And so, so really just grateful for this. And thank you to everyone for just listening and being here. I'm sorry that I couldn't get to everyone's questions, but I think you'll let me know how we can do that.
Yes, definitely. Brother Masood will definitely be in contact with you. Shukran so much for a lovely session. It was really beautiful. Even I think just your tone and the way you approached it was just therapeutic in itself. And it was just so suitable to the event. So shukran for that so much.
Afwan.
Okay. And we hope to have you again in the future soon.
Shukran.
Fine.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam, everyone.
Salam and shukran to all the viewers.
Okay, take care. Salam.